Welcome back everyone to Genshin Interact. We'll be taking a look at the second half of the 4.6 banners today. The first character we'll be looking at is Wanderer, and the next character we'll be looking at is Baizhu. With these two characters on the banners, let's go through both of these banners and see whether or not these characters are a good option for you.
And if you do enjoy the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe and check out the rest of the channel for other videos you may be interested in. We do also have a Discord you can join where our members can talk with each other and even talk with us. Looking at these next banners on the second half of 4.6, we asked the question in this video of, should you pull these characters? Now, onto the video. Losing the 50-50 is the worst feeling in Genshin. And I understand, believe me. That's why whenever I have nothing left and am in the dilemma of whether or not to spend, I use Loot Bar. Loot Bar is 100% safe and only requires your Genshin UID to purchase Genesis crystals. Normally, the price for me to buy 6,480 crystals is $100, but you can see here how Loot Bar has reduced the price to about $85, and if you're a new user, you get an additional 5% off. The way it works is that Loot Bar tops up your account through the official channel with Hoyoverse. After making a purchase, you can expect to receive it in 30 minutes or less. In my case, I received mine in just about 5 minutes. Another comforting thing about Loot Bar is that they are trustworthy and offer 24/7 live support. Other creators like Dukaja, Jello Impact, Superatom, Mujin, and Tevat Times have endorsed and used this product themselves, including both Vixen and myself. Just use the link in the description to get another discount on top of the already cheaper prices at purchase. Thank you Loot Bar for sponsoring today's video, and now, let's dive in.
First, we are going to talk about each character's kit and kind of how they work. So for the people who don't know the characters all too well, this section is for you. But if you already know these characters, considering they already have reruns, you can go over to the weapon discussion or the question section, and you can find those timestamps in the description or at the timeline below. The first character we do want to talk about, obviously, is Wanderer, and obviously we already know what he does. At least he has been rerun, he's already had a banner before. And so looking at him first and foremost, he ascends into crit rate, so that's going to help him obviously in general with the crit ratio, and then his weapon's going to go into crit damage as well, so helping that a little bit with him. But in terms of his actual, I guess, when we look at what he kind of fits into a team, he's obviously going to be an Anemo DPS, so he's going to take a lot of his time on field and use a lot of supports that are going to be off field and have a lot of off field bursts or skills and whatnot to help him do more damage on field. Now, looking at him in general, Rift, what could you actually tell us about his kit?
Yeah, well, looking right into his kit, his normal attack isn't anything crazy on its own, but you do want to level this just because when we do talk about the skill here in a minute, basically this skill is going to increase the normal attack damage, and a lot of Wanderer's damage does come heavily from his normal and charged attack, so you should level his normal attack. But looking at his skill now, a bigger part of his kit is called Hanega Song of the Wind. So basically, Wanderer will go up into an airborne state, and when he does so, he'll deal some AoE Anemo damage by doing so. But now he can actually kind of fly around, and he'll actually have a separate stamina bar called Kuuguryoku points. So you can kind of see that from gameplay. Instead of the yellow stamina bar on the right, you'll have this more bluish teal bar on the left, and he'll actually use those up when dealing charge attacks and flying around. So basically, while in what's called the wind favored state from this skill, his normal and charge attack damage will be increased, as well as their AoE being increased as well. So while in this wind favored state, the Wanderer will persistently consume his Kuuguryoku points that I mentioned earlier to maintain this hovering state. When sprinting, additional Kuuguryoku points will be consumed for the Wanderer to accelerate mid-air. Holding sprint will cause persistent Kuuguryoku points consumption to maintain speed. This effect will replace his default sprint. Jumping expends extra Kuuguryoku points to increase hovering height. Holding jump will cause persistent Kuuguryoku point consumption to keep increasing hovering height. Now when you run out of Kuuguryoku points, this will end the wind favored state and you will fall out of it. And then a second cast during the duration of wind favored state will also end it. So once again, you will just want to increase this alongside of your normal attack because it is just an enhancement skill essentially for his normal attacks, much like other characters like Yoimiya or Hu Tao, etc.
Looking alongside of that, while his skill and his normal attacks are going to be where, obviously his skill enhancing his normal attacks is where most of his damage is going to be coming from, and his charge attacks, the burst has a little bit of damage, and it's not necessary probably to highly level into this talent. It's more just for an extra little bit of extra damage, especially in rotation. It's just kind of nice to just throw out a little bit of extra AoE Anemo damage that he does here. So basically, while doing at this point in time, when he uses his ult, obviously it'll just do multiple instances of AoE animo damage, and if the character is in the win favored state due to the skill that he has, the win favored state will end after you use your ult. So if you are hovering around in his skill state and you use the ult, it will pop you out of your skill. So that's why people tend to use it after the skill state has ended or right before. Looking at some of the passives, I would rather like to talk about specifically his first passive talent, Jade Claim Flower, and I do specifically want to talk about this because it talks about when his skill comes into contact with any of the swirlable elements, Hydro, Pyro, Cryo, or Electro. The instance, obviously in this sense, it will have to be when it is unleashed, so you have to pick up the Pyro in that instance. The win favored state will obtain certain buffs depending on what element you pick up. You can also pick up to 2 different types of elements and the 2 different, obviously, the buffs that come alongside of it as well. When you swirl Hydro, it is going to increase that point cap in the skill up to an extra 20, which means that you'll obviously be increasing your duration in your normal attack state, normal and charge attack enhanced state in that win favored state to do more damage. Pyro, if you swirl that, will increase your attack by 30%, also increasing just more damage, considering that is what he's going to be focused on for damage. And then Cryo is going to increase his crit rate by 20%, make your damage a little bit more consistent. And then Electro is going to help his normal charge attacks whenever those hit opponents. He'll have a certain amount of energy restored to him, and so that's just going to basically be helping your burst, which is why people tend to focus on Hydro, Cryo, or Pyro to really help a lot more with damage and stability with that in that sense.
So now taking a look at Baizhu on the other half of the second half of the 4.6 banners. So his team function, he's more of an off-field character, and we know he's a good healer and shielder, so he kind of has this dual capability right there. And he's just an amazing off-field Dendra support because he also does have some buffing capabilities that we may talk about later in his passives. Just a very, very solid character. If you don't know how he works, basically he's the 5-star version of Yao Yao. So he's got great versatility. As a healer, you can really put him in a lot of different teams. He can be good for Farina to counter her drain and also give her more fanfare. There's a lot of different teams you can place Baizhu in, so overall I think he's a great character to have. But looking into his kit, Vixen, what can you show us?
Well, obviously when we're looking at his actual, what he kind of does, at least in general with his normal attacks, his skills, and his burst, his normal attacks aren't going to be necessarily anything special, and you're not really going to want to level into this at all. He's not a damaging character, but what you're really focusing on here, like Rich was talking about, is him healing, and that's mainly going to be coming from his skill and his burst. So looking at his skill, like I said, the skill and the burst you're going to want to level into. Looking at his skill, he controls a Gossamer Sprite that is going to be thrown out and then is going to deal a little bit of Dendro damage. That's not what you're focusing on, but once it actually does, it'll perform 3 different attacks, and if that's obviously if there are no opponents nearby, it'll basically hit 3 different enemies, or it'll hit the same opponent 3 times, and the sprite will then return, or if it only hits once or whatever, then it'll return, and then healing all party members when it does so, and return to Baizhu is when it will heal all party members based on Baiju's max HP. So this is a big buff to just extra healing, just a huge hit of healing. I know this is probably the biggest way that you're going to get healing from his kit. Whereas his burst is going to be a little bit more specific in it does a little bit something different. Instead of just a quick amount of healing, it's small little bits of healing. So Rift, what can you tell us about his burst?
Yeah, well, his burst is called Holistic Revivification. He's going to enter the Pulsing Clarity state, and he's going to create a Seamless Shield that absorbs Dendro damage with 250% effectiveness. While in this state, Baizhu will generate a new Seamless Shield every 2.5 seconds. So the Seamless Shield will heal your own active character based on Baiju's max HP, and also attack opponents by unleashing Spirit Veins, dealing Dendro damage, under the following circumstances. So the first circumstance is when a character is under the protection of a Seamless Shield and a new Seamless Shield is generated, then it will go away, create a new Seamless Shield, and send out that little Spirit Vein attack. Also, when the Seamless Shield's effects expire, or when it is shattered too by either taking damage, that will also cause that to happen as well. So basically, throughout the burst, your shield, your Seamless Shield created by Baizhu, is going to come onto your character, and then it's going to go away after 2.5 seconds. Then it's going to generate a new one, go away after 2.5 seconds, and then come back. So it's just kind of regenerating shields every 2.5 seconds, which at first I knew some people were kind of like skeptical about that, but I think it's great because no matter how much damage you tank from that first or second shield, you can always rely on the next shield coming back. So it's kind of a weird way of you can tank some bigger hits essentially because you can rely on the shield to come back instead of just breaking and then you not not having it at all, because a new one will just come up there. So I think it's very good. So he's going to have great shielding capability here, and also just a lot of healing as a character.
Looking at the first weapon, obviously on the weapon banner, we're going to have Tulaytullah's Remembrance, and then on the other side, we'll have Jadefall Splendor. But first and foremost, looking at Tulaytullah's Remembrance, which is going to be Wanderer's weapon, it does have a high amount of base attack, which is where it kind of makes up for the low amount of crit damage at 44.1% at level 90, and the passive is, or the ability on the refinement, is going to be stated at refinement 1 with both of these weapons. It states that normal attack speed is increased by 10%, and after the wielder unleashes an elemental skill, normal attack damage will be increased by 4.8% for every second for 14 seconds. After hitting an opponent with a normal attack during this duration, normal attack damage will be increased another 9.6%. This increase can be triggered once every 0.3 seconds. The maximum normal attack damage increase you can get for a single duration of overall effects is at 48%. The effect will be removed when the wielder leaves the field and uses the elemental skill again, will reset all damage buffs as well. Looking at just characters in general here, you're probably just looking for somebody who's obviously focusing on, obviously it's an okay amount of crit damage, but that's not really actually what you're wanting for this weapon. It has a high amount of base attack, so it could be used for that, but honestly, you're looking for characters that are going to do a lot of normal attack damage. So obviously Wanderer, it is his weapon, it's going to be great for him because you're using your skill and then immediately going into a bunch of normal attacks. And with a lot of Catalyst characters, we see characters like Yanfei or whatever, where you do a lot of normal attacks, but she even focuses a lot on charge attacks and doing for her at least a lot of her damage. But at least for Catalyst characters, a lot of characters aren't really necessarily going to be using a crazy amount of normal attacks to do a lot of damage. Even characters like Nervalette or whatever are focusing on charge attacks. Wriothesley could use this weapon. For instance, I use this on my Wriothesley as kind of a copium, a 5-star usage instead of his own personal weapon, because it does help increase his normal attack damage, and that is a good way of getting damage out of him as well. But other characters are really focusing on charge attacks, so really I would say Wanderer, Wriothesley next, and then Yanfei are probably the only characters that could really consistently and well enough use this weapon. I wouldn't really pull this weapon for them though. If you have Wanderer, it's probably the only one that you're really going for the weapon.
Next, looking at Baizhu's weapon, Jadefall Splendor. This has a main stat of HP percent, and when you do level this up to level 90, you'll have 49.6% HP, so a good marginal upgrade to your HP. And we do know, after we had looked at Baizhu, his shield, strength, and his healing all scales on his HP, so that's going to be very good for him. And then the ability on this weapon states that for 3 seconds after using an elemental burst or creating a shield, the equipping character can gain the Primordial Jade Regalia effect. And this states that it will restore 4.5 energy every 2.5 seconds and gain 0.3% elemental damage bonus for their corresponding elemental type for every 1000 max HP they possess, up to 12%. Primordial Jade Regalia will still take effect even if the equipping character is not on the field. Obviously, being Baizhu's weapon is going to be very good for him just because he is creating shields every 2.5 seconds. So this is going to be happening pretty much all the time. So it's going to be very good for him just for getting his burst back and also the big increase to the HP from the main stat. Some other characters you could use this for, at least arguably, just because it is an HP main stat, you could use this on a character like Kokomi if you don't have her Everlasting Moonglow, her personal weapon. So it can work for her as well because it's just going to be good for getting her energy back. But she's not going to be creating shields or anything, so just when you use the burst is when that passive will take effect. So it still can work for her. But other than her, it's really not going to be for anyone else. I've heard people try to argue Nervalette because HP scaling, but I don't think it's worth it. Just there are 4-star catalysts that I think go well beyond that. Just use Solar Pearl from the Battle Pass or Witsith if you've gotten that from any banners. Are going to be a lot better in my personal opinion. So this weapon is a little bit more niche to Baizhu. I don't recommend pulling this weapon unless you want it for Baizhu.
Now going into our final section where we talk about pulling options and kind of what at least a lot of different questions that we like to ask. So the first question we want to talk about is, do you need either character on your account? What elements or roles is your account in need of? And kind of who else fills the role that you currently have to see if you actually need this character. So the first character obviously is Wanderer. He is a very nice character, and if you don't have an Animo DPS, he's very nice. You know, the first question obviously in this section is kind of like, you know, do you need either character? And specifically looking at Wanderer, is he really necessary for you? You don't need Wanderer. He is nice, especially for a lot of newer players, because you can work with a lot of 4-stars and a lot of, their bursts. Xingqiu, Xiangling, Bennett. A lot of these characters do a lot of off-field application, and so he's going to like that a lot, especially just for extra damage output in general. But in general with him, you don't necessarily need him. He's not necessarily a game-breaking character. If you're looking for elements or roles on on an account, if you're saying, I really need an Anemo DPS character, it's between Zhao and him. Zhao takes a little bit more investment, but he's going to be doing way more damage than Wanderer can do. I have both of the characters, both in general built pretty well, and I still have a lot more fun with my Zhao and tend to do a lot more damage, although he does take a lot more investment to actually get to the point where he's doing extremely well. Looking on the other side at Baizhu, not a necessity character, especially because a lot of people who are going to be using him as well are going to be looking for, Nilou Bloom teams or whatever. So if you have a Nilou Bloom team and you want to upgrade it with, you already have your Nahida and your Nilou and another Hydra character, and you're trying to upgrade it with a Baizhu, just throw in a slot, then it could kind of make sense, but it's not necessity for really anyone. Even if you don't try to, if you're trying to just force him into a lot of different teams, he's a great healer, and I do have a lot of fun with him, but I wouldn't say he's a necessity on anybody's account. And if you're looking for an element or, a healer role, Yao Yao already kind of fits that role. She's already a 4-star character. You can try to get her in general either on banners or whatnot, and she's an extremely good character at that. She has a lot of application off field with her skill and her burst, so it does kind of help a little bit to know that there is a good 4-star option instead. And I think that's why it kind of pushes Baizhu to being a very, very niche character that you don't necessarily need.
The next question we take a look at is, what kinds of teams are you trying to build? So with Wanderer, like Vixen much already stated, a lot of his teammates can really be a lot of the versatile off-fielders. Like most of the 4-stars are, we got Fischl, Xiangling, Xingqiu. There's a lot out there. Rosaria, the list can really go on. So he's very versatile as far as teammates go. Obviously, if you have Farazan, I would recommend using Farazan, whether or not she's C6. She's just a really, really good support for Anemo damage dealer. She's kind of a no-brainer. And then if you have Bennett, go throw him in there, get that attack buff. So his teams can be pretty versatile. He can be good in soup teams just because as an Anemo driver. If you have Hazo and you've played a lot of Hazo, he can basically replace him in the same slot, and even play style, just a lot of normal attacks. Just, take out the skill hit that Hazo does, right? So it's a good character, like Vixen was saying, for new players or players just who want to have fun with his unique playstyle. He's like one of the only characters who's dealing damage while airborne, so it is kind of fun to use. But yeah, if you have Zhao already, then it kind of is a deterrent to needing to pull him. I would just say pull him if you really just want to and you're a veteran player. So his teams are going to be pretty straightforward. But looking at Baizhu, I think out of the two, if you were asking me for team builds, Baizhu is going to be the more valuable character on this banner. And why do I say that? Well, he's a support character. He can heal, he can shield. Things like that are just a little bit more valuable to me specifically. Especially if you have Farina. I already talked about this earlier. He's going to be great to use with Farina. He's one of Sino's best teammates, actually. One of Sino's best team is Sino, Farina, Nahida, and Baizhu. But because I don't have Baizhu, I've been using Yao Yao. And so that's another good point, though, is that if you do already have Yao Yao, like Vixen already stated, the need for Baizhu is just going to be lessened by that, because Yao Yao is just such a good 4-star. For what she does, she's a great healer. She can sustain for the entire team. Her burst is a full team-wide heal, which is really good. So if you have Yao Yao, just know that you don't have to go for Baizhu.
Looking at our next section, we talk about weighing the dangers from a new free-to-play to just different types of characters or different types of players that are focusing on, what are they kind of need in their account for these two types of characters. Now, we've kind of already gone over it a little bit, but with free-to-play players or newer players or whatnot, probably the better pull, if you're looking at them two, is going to be Wanderer over Baizhu. Wanderer makes a little bit more sense, but even still, I wouldn't pull Wanderer right now in general. He's not going to necessarily be one of the characters in the game that is going to bring you, be the damaged character, the DPS character, to bring you into the late game where you can start focusing on other characters and other teams. I think, honestly, those are going to be a different set of characters that are probably not going to be best for newer players. If you already have, a bunch of characters and you still are free to play and you've, already have some other characters and you're just looking for an Anemo DPS and you don't want to wait for a Zhao rerun, or a future, Anemo DPS, and you really do want an Anemo DPS and you kind of just like his style, I could say that he's definitely a fun character to play. And he does work well with a lot of things that you will have on an account, like a lot of good 4-star weapons as well that work well with him. Looking at Baizhu though, honestly, he's a character I would say for free-to-play players to just stay away from. He is a great healer and he's got a lot of positives to him. His kit comes to full fruition once you actually get to the later game and when you have a lot of other characters, for instance, that Nilou Bloom team or whatnot. He is a great healer, but I really do think that at least for free-to-play players, you kind of want to focus on certain characters, especially early game players, I would say to stay away.
Looking at veteran spenders and even veteran free-to-play players, you've just been playing the game for a lot longer. You're going to have a lot more things on your account. You already have those decent lineups for doing the Abyss. You got 2 teams, all that kind of good stuff. At this point, you may already have what you need, and you're at a point in the game where I don't really need anything, right? I'm going to pull for what I want because I want it. So with Wanderer, I think he's a perfect example of that. Say you already have Zhao because you pulled him well off early in the game when his first release. So you have your Anemo DPS slot on your account covered just fine. But you're really looking at Wanderer and you're like, man, I don't know. He looks a lot of fun. And I have my C6 Farazan. I have a good Bennett. I have the right characters, right? So it's like, what do you have to lose? Because you already have your Pyro DPS slot covered. You've got Cryo DPSs. You've got Hydra. You've got everything because you're a veteran and you've been playing the game a long time. So that just gives a lot of credence to, hey, yeah, go pull Wanderer if you want to because he's a lot of fun. I think you'd have a lot of fun with him. And I think the same thing can be said with Baizhu. Most people already have Yao Yao, at least that, maybe pull on Al Haytham's banner. When he first released, I believe that's the one Yao Yao was on as a 4-star. We've also had the free 4-star selector from Leeway, and I bet a lot of players picked Yao Yao if they hadn't already wished for her just because she was the newest 4-star at the time. And then we even had the one with Gaming. Maybe some people picked Yao Yao there as well. So I believe a lot of people would already have Yao Yao, and she's an amazing character. I think if you have Yao Yao, you don't need Baizhu. I feel like I can say that. Yes, Baizhu is better. He is a 5-star. In addition to healing, he provides some shielding and a little bit of better Dendro application over a longer period of time. But I don't have to feel like I need to pull Baizhu because I can complete all the content the game has to offer with Yao Yao as my only team's healer and Dendro application alongside another Dendro for the Resonance. And it does just fine. I get everything done just how I want to, and Yao Yao's really fun to use. So I think for both of these characters, it is a little bit more tailored for people who maybe wanted them on their initial releases and weren't able to grab them. Now is your chance to pick them up, or maybe you want some constellations. But yeah, for new players, I would honestly suggest just skipping so that you can get some of these better Fontaine characters like Cloran coming up soon, or even just looking into Natlin.
Now, looking at the constellations in general, whether you're a whale and you just want to kind of depend on whether or not you want constellations on the characters, or if you already have the character and you're not a whale and you just kind of want to focus on, do I want to maybe grab some constellations on these characters? I'm going to start it out by saying no. I would just say no personally for both of these characters, and there's a specific reason why. The first few constellations actually for Wanderer aren't really that great. The first constellation increases a lot of attack speed, which only by about 10%, which isn't necessarily terrible, but it's not necessarily great. And it does help a little bit with those wind arrows from one of his passes, where you can just do a little bit more extra damage from those when you dash when you're in your skill state. His C2 helps with a little bit more on the damage sense of his ults, which is not necessarily what you're trying to really focus on. In a sense, it helps a lot more with ult damage, but that's not where you're focusing on, so it's a little bit weird to kind of focus on that. And then the C3 as well, to even just try to push it further to see if there's something saving it, increases burst level as well. So the first 3 constellations, personally for me, are really not that great for Wanderer, and I would really just keep them at C0 if you really want. If you were looking at constellations, I would say just look at another character. Looking at Baizhu, first constellation is okay. It's not great, but it's not terrible. It increases his skill charges by 1, so at C1 you can have 2 charges of the skill, so it's extra healing, I guess. But because he already does so much healing in general from his skill and his burst in a rotation of just doing each of those, you're not really at a point where you really want to, number one, pop him back out again to do another skill hit, and you're not really at a point where it's really hurting you in general to do that. Whereas some other characters, having an extra skill usage is kind of nice. His C2 is just actually a damage increase for him personally, as well as a little bit of a healing buff, but like I said, once again, it's just a little bit of an annoyance because it is really just a more healing and it's not a crazy amount, and so it's not like you're not really getting a whole lot for getting 2 whole 5 stars into him. And then looking at his third constellation, it just increases his level of his burst by 3, which is nice, but to get all the way to a C3 to actually do that, and the other 2 not really being that useful, I would just say to stay away from constellations for both these characters.
Finally, looking at our last question, we ask, do you need the weapons? And we probably gave a good impression earlier on in the video when we talked about the weapons, but much like the constellations, it's just kind of a no, really, unless you have the character. But even then, if you have these characters, I don't think you have to get their weapons. Like, I have Wanderer, I just use Widsith, and I get really favorable results just using that 4-star catalyst, even without refinements. And so it's like, do I really want to pull a weapon, or could I just be saving these Primogems for a little bit more value out of either a new character or a weapon for a character I already have, maybe on the rerun, that just, there's more value behind that. Like, Nervalet with his weapon, that's a huge increase for the character. It's insane. But like, for Wanderer, it's kind of like, yeah, it's an increase, but it's like, we're talking maybe like 10% better. And so it's like, do I really want to do that? And then with Baizhu, I mean, there's some good 4-star options. And like we've talked in the whole video, he's more focused on just healing and using his burst. You don't really need to do anything else on field. So good 4-star options without you having to get this weapon. You could just be using Thrilling Tales. It is an HP main stat, so it does help his healing and shield strength. You could just use the Favonius Codex for more energy if you're not getting your burst back, because that's pretty important for him. So it's just, when I look at these weapons, it's like, I don't think you need them. If you want them for the character, that's totally fine, and it is going to be their best option, but at the end of the day, I don't think you need these weapons. We hope that this video could help you decide on whether these characters or weapons coming up on this next banner are for you.
As always, if you have any suggestions that may help other players, go ahead and let us know down in the comments. Make sure to like, subscribe, and check out our Discord as well. Thank you again for watching the video, and we'll see you in the next one.